Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dan, for all your help.
You're welcome. All right, Ralph, you're live.
Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. It's September 9th. I hope everybody had a good weird summer. Let me go ahead and take roll here. It's I got 4:05 p.m. So we'll do a verbal because we're Zoom, obviously. I am here. Wendy Lease.
Here.
Tom Pollock.
Here.
Bob Juneman.
Here.
Al Malone.
Here.
Matthew.
Here.
Anna Verska.
Here.
And Tom Arnold.
Here.
And we have John Stevens here. And then
Here.
Thank you, Carol. We got Carol, Jennifer, and Angie, and I see Anna Baca on also from staff.
Yes.
Who are we missing? Who are we missing?
Nobody.
Okay.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 8 members. As you know, we had a number of vacancies, and then, as I mentioned, I think it was the last meeting we had, which was back in June. John Henson did not reapply and basically resigned from the committee. John,
So all 8 of us are present.
correct.
Cool.
John Stevens, do you mind, just right at the outset, we had a bike and walk committee meeting last week, and staff mentioned what they thought the parameters were for the committee member terms, because, you know, with COVID, you know, council did not reappoint the normal April timeframe. Could you just take a second and I guess your understanding or what the council's decided on committee member terms and when reappointments would be, if you don't mind?
Well, let me make sure you guys can hear me. Well, yeah, I think, isn't it normally in April, we would have had a staggered group that would go off and we would reappoint, but we didn't do that. So now as a practical matter, you know, that's not likely to happen before the election, which is in less than 2 months. And then, you know, the election's certified in December, and then we kind of come back after the first of the year. So I expect that everybody who's on this committee, you know, unless they resign, is going to stay on through the end of the year. And then we'll revisit that with the new council. And I don't know whether we'll do it in advance of April, which is when we normally make committee appointments, or we'll do it earlier than that. Because there are going to be some commission positions that are going to be open as a result of the election. I guess 4 commission positions. So that'll all happen most likely in the first quarter of 2021. And I just don't know how, and I don't know the timing of when the committee appointments are going to fall. But I think everybody should be secure that this is going to be the committee that's going to be in place at least throughout the end of the year, and most likely throughout the first quarter of next year.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, let me just a quick couple comments. Again, thank you, everybody. It's been, our last meeting was actually June. I wanted to make a few quick comments. I was looking at the CalPERS website, and since this is Finance and Pension Committee, thought I'd make a couple of comments on CalPERS. Their FY 1920, meaning ending June of 2020, about 2.5 months ago or so, their performance was, preliminary performance, they say, was 4.7%. So obviously well short of the 7% goal. The fund is 71% funded with a value of about $389 billion. some interesting stats here. Per the Wall Street Journal, I guess they took a look at public pensions. I'm not sure how many public pensions or how many states or anything, but for the Wall Street Journal, they said the average for FY 1920 was a return of 3.2%, which bodes well for CalPERS. They were well short of the 7%, but they were above apparently their peers across the nation. Startling number here, in the February-March time frame, the fund lost $70 billion. And some of us can relate to that with the dump the stock market took. They made most of that back, though, by the end of June. The 5-year numbers for CalPERS, the last 5 years performance, average performance is 6.3%. 10 years is 8.5%. 20-year average is a 5.5%. They're moving more to private equity, which they think they'll get a better performance. They're trying to de-risk their portfolios. We've kind of talked about on past meetings, but they're trying to move to more private equity. They think they can get a better return, which personally, that kind of bothers me. But they have, in the last year, they terminated 30 external managers, money managers. And so they're managing more in-house. 95% of their equity programs are managed internally now versus about last year, I guess it was 78%. So they're doing a lot more in-house to save management fees. However, interesting enough, private equity, even though they're going more to private equity, last fiscal year, private equity had a negative 5.1 return. Related to that is in the July, August, I think it was June, July, August timeframe, there were 2 court cases settled. And the various cities or counties had made some determinations per the PEPRA law that was enacted in 2013, which is the Public Employee Pension Reform Act. The local unions for that locale sued, and basically the cities won those cases, and that is, I think, good for the residents of Costa Mesa and the residents of California. Basically, it tried to cut back on some of the spiking that was being done as employees reached the end of their careers and ready to retire. And they could do certain things to increase their pension. So that those terms in PEPRA were upheld by the court. So that's, again, in my opinion, that's a good thing. Cut down or improve. Anyway, okay. Also, the way back in April, because we went to Zoom, the recommendation, not by finance staff, but let's just say the recommendation at the time, or the concern of the time, was to hold off on approving committee minutes until we started meeting in person again. Well, I think this has gone on maybe more than most people imagined. So we've got, and Angie checked with Brenda, so we've been holding off approving committee minutes. We're going to go ahead and do that next month. So next month we'll be approving, and we'll get this on the agenda. We'll approve our March, April, May, June, and today, meaning September's committee minutes. So work with Angie. We'll get those minutes out to the committee members, well in advance of the meeting. So please read those minutes so you're prepared to vote on them in our October meeting, which will be, I think it's October 14th. And with that, I think we'll move on. Any public, I guess I should have done public comments before, maybe not. Anyway, any public comments, Angie?
There were no public
No.
comments this time.
No, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And, okay, welcome Katrina. I see your picture. Okay, let's move on to new business. Basically, we have some reports by both Carol and Jennifer. And then we'll go on from there. So Carol, do you want to go ahead with the 4A, the staffing?
Of course, thank you, Ralph. Last council meeting, I took forth to the City Council a request to reorganize a couple positions in the Finance Department. So I wanted to share with you tonight that PowerPoint presentation and the reason why we felt the need to make some adjustments in the Finance Department. Okay, make sure everybody can see the PowerPoint presentation. So on September 1st, I went to the City Council and I asked a reorganization of the Finance Department. And prior to September 1st, there were two divisions within the Finance Department, under the Assistant Finance Director, which is Jennifer, which is Accounting and Treasury, and the second one being in the Budget and Purchasing area. My focus for the Finance Department was specifically in the accounting unit. As you can tell, in the accounting unit, there is one accounting supervisor overseeing all of the accounting functions and one payroll coordinator. Now, this presented some challenges in finance, having only one person in-house who would be able to run the system's payroll was just not conducive. And it also did not allow for a backup support as well as some redundancy in ensuring that 70% of the city's costs was pretty much managed only by one person. The accounting supervisor is more of a generalist position and would not be able to support the detailed payroll functions as required in payroll division. So I went forth to the City Council and requested a payroll unit under the Assistant Finance Director to have a payroll supervisor and a payroll coordinator. This would allow the city to have two full-time payroll experts in-house to be able to run the city's payroll system. The city's payroll system is extremely complicated. So as we have already discussed before, the city's financial system is extremely old. It's about 20 to 25 years old. When we brought forth this change, one of the things that was alarming to me was first and foremost that we did not have sufficient backup in case the one person that is currently in payroll, would she retire or leave under any other circumstances, we did not have sufficient backup systems. The second part of it is the detailed amount of work that goes into processing this payroll. Just to process payroll alone, it would take over 75 steps. And not only that, you have to be extremely apt with the safety protocols. So we would have payroll from the telestaff system for our fire department. We also have multiple schedules for our police staff. That on top of the 10 different bargaining groups, and each one of them have specific detailed changes from medical plans to PERS payouts to all kinds of details that's specific just to that bargaining group would have to be implemented. So one of the things that we realized with this furlough is each of the bargaining groups took their 5% furloughs in different methods. For example, some of the safety personnel took their 5% in medical reductions. Others decided that it was best for them to have a pot of hours throughout the year that they would reduce their pay accordingly. And then there's another group that chose to take 5% across the salary. All of that detail would have to have been programmed within the city's payroll system and also double checked and verified. As a result, we needed to make sure that there was an additional layer of experts in-house that would be able to not only be served as backup, but also be that check and balance within payroll, making sure that all of the details within the city's payroll system was adhered to. And that includes all kinds of payouts and reporting. So it's not just the paychecks that the payroll coordinator is responsible for. They're also responsible for payments to CalPERS for the pensions. They're responsible for all of the taxes and that they be timely and correct. So from the state, the federal, all of the reporting for the different types of deferred compensation systems, the payouts to the medical plans and so forth. It's extremely detailed and extremely complicated. And as a result, we did ask the City Council to approve the reallocation of an existing accountant position that was approved last year and reallocate that position from accountant to a payroll supervisor with a minor, about $25,000 a year impact. It was extremely critical for us to make sure that we created that redundancy in payroll, as well as the check and balance required to make sure that all of the payouts were accurate and that there was sufficient amount of overview in this particular area. Thankfully, I thank the City Council for approving the item that night. We did take this to the budget subcommittee at FiPAC, and I just want to thank them as well. They also supported this change prior to City Council. We did want to see if anybody had any questions related to this part of the presentation.
Any questions?
I have one. To be clear, we're not adding employees. We're just doing a reallocation that you need a higher level person to accomplish all of these ends. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I know this. You know, this was a single point of failure, and I know that payroll has been an issue, and having one person support payroll has been an issue for several years. So, appreciate Carol and Jennifer for bringing it up again and taking action. The last thing you want to do is mess with people's payroll, and so.
That is true.
I mean, you can do a lot of other things, but you don't mess with their payroll.
Nope, and you better make the payroll too.
Yeah, you better. Yeah. Okay. Did that cover it, Carol?
That covers the presentation. Thank
Okay.
you, Ralph.
All right. Thank you. Hopefully get somebody in soon for that position or internally. Okay, we got the new business. We got item B, investment policy. In this, we're kind of getting an update on this because we haven't really looked at our investment policy or had an update for a number of months. So I'm glad we're taking a look at that and appreciate Jennifer, you presenting that.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we, many of the committee members know that the committee take a review of the city's investment policy every year to make sure that we are still in compliance and we are also making the best decision for the city's investment portfolio. And this year, usually before we get to the policy, there's Angie have emailed a copy of the updated red line policy to all the members, and we can go over them this year. Before we get down to the policy, I just want to give a brief overview of how the staff reviews the policy on an annual basis before presenting for FiPAC's consideration and ultimately for the city council's consideration. The investment policy, every year staff and Chandler Asset Management, who is the city's investment advisor, perform a review of any California government code changes that pertains to municipal agencies' investment policy. And we have done that this year. And we looked at the changes outlined by CDAP, which is a short name for California Debt and Investment Advisory Commission. And they do annual review of the government code and put out a report every year. And we looked at that, and for the new year, and we found that the city's investment policy are still in compliance. And there's some of our policy provisions are more restrictive than the California government code, which is allowed since our portfolio, investment portfolios goals are safety, liquidity, and yield in that order. So for this year, the staff's recommendation is to re-adopt the city's investment policy without any changes. And I'm open for any questions.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions or comments. Throughout the policy statement, there's reference to the city treasurer. As far as I know, we haven't had a city treasurer since Bobby Young. So shouldn't that be the finance director instead of city treasurer?
The city's treasurer is the finance director.
Yeah, but I mean, in the policy statement that specifically says city treasurer, shouldn't we change the language?
I can look at the municipal code. I believe in our codes, it says the finance director serve as the city's treasurer.
Okay, just a question there.
Yeah.
But one other thing, when I first came on this committee, we took a look at that statement and we really did a number on it. We really changed a lot of things. And one of the things we did, if you look at under limitations, we eliminated repurchase agreements. And because just a risk factor, we thought we got a lot of other things we can do. We don't need to get into repurchase agreements. So we eliminated it, but still in the text of the policy, and I can't remember where it is, there's a discussion of limitations on repurchase agreements. So we ought to probably get that out of there. Just remove any language pertaining to repurchase agreements because we took it out of our eligible securities. Other than that, I agree. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I have a question.
One question. Do we have from Chandler, do we have a yearly statement from them certifying that they're in concert with our investment policy statement? If we don't, we probably should have that on record.
We have the compliance statement in the monthly investment report. The Chandler certifies that our investments every month are still in compliance with our investment policy.
Okay, by the way, I haven't seen a Chandler report for a long time.
We used to get it quarterly, didn't we? Didn't we get a quarterly
It's
report?
the monthly treasurer's report. It's attached to the monthly treasurer's report.
I have a question.
Yeah, we're doing it, basically we're doing it online, if you will, or instead of dedicating X time during a committee meeting, we decided to just do it online. Or send out, have staff send out the report. Wendy.
Yes, Jennifer, are you saying, thank you for all that good information. So in the broader sense, then since Chandler looks at our policy and under the current economic situation that we're faced with in COVID, they are not making any recommendations, or it just to stay the course, and that the foundation that we laid when Bob and the others edited the policy, it still holds. There weren't any recommendations and to adjust it in any way.
No, right now, Chandler's recommendation is just to hold the course.
Okay, good.
Jennifer, you mentioned that the city's policies are more stringent than I guess California guidelines, if you will.
California government code.
Government code. Okay. Is there, obviously safety is number one, but is there any flexibility there working with Chandler where we could I guess defer to the government, the California code, and pick up another, 10th of a point or something, and still be, safe and minimal risk?
And I think right now, also with our, we can definitely look at under all the allowable investments in our policy, what else we can invest that still keeps the city's assets safe and liquid as needed.
Okay.
Right now, so in the, I think at least for the year ended June 30th, 2020, we look at the portfolio's performance compared to our benchmark. And so far, I think we are performing better than the benchmark. So I think in that way, it's an indication that the investment, the portfolio is performing well. And I can give you one of the indicator is the average market yield. So right now, our portfolio as a whole is yield about 50 basis point higher than the benchmark.
Okay, well, that's positive, yeah.
What is the benchmark?
The benchmark is, let's see, our benchmark is, I think it's a Bank America municipal portfolio benchmark, treasury portfolio benchmark.
Do you know what it is right now, the number? What percent?
On which one, on the market yield?
Well, either our performance or the benchmark, they're 50 basis points difference, right?
Yes. So the benchmark market yield is right now is 20 basis point, and our portfolio benchmark yield right now is 70 basis point.
Okay, thank you.
And, okay. Anything else? Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it. Item C, January through April financial results. And I believe, Carol, this is when we say financial, we're talking revenue in this case. Is that?
I went ahead and updated some of the expenditures as
Okay.
well. I know that we had talked about revenues. I had a feeling that the priority for FiPAC would be the revenue side, since that's really the area that we would be most impacted by the COVID. So I added expenditures as well for tonight.
Okay, super.
Okay, so let me go ahead and start sharing the screen. I think everybody received the PowerPoint presentation that Angie sent over a little while ago for tonight. So we wanted to present tonight the actual as January through April, on the revenue side as well as the expenditure side. I did want to remind you, however, that these numbers will not really reflect the impact of COVID just yet. And I'll kind of walk through these a little bit with you so you can understand them. But at this point is when we were first starting to take a look at how COVID would start to impact, which is why we went to the city council early in April to start implementing fiscal constraints within the expenditure side and start taking a really good look at what the revenue side was going to be looking like on COVID for COVID purposes. So in January through April for general fund revenues, I see here that January, February, March, and April, the property tax was not going to be impacted. So we knew from the get-go and through continuous meetings with HDL, which is our consultant that takes a look at property taxes for us, that 1920 was not going to be impacted on the property tax side. And the reason for that is because we receive our largest two disbursements in November, December, and then again in April, and some in May. By the time COVID hit, we were already into March, and we were not seeing any of those impacts on the property tax side. So you can see from the property tax, even year to April, we had received 37 million of our expected 43.3 million. So we were pretty confident property tax is not going to be impacted. However, we continued to keep an eye out. The sales tax component, this is the one that we were most concerned about when COVID hit. In 1819, we received a little bit under $65 million. However, I did want to remind everybody that in 1819, sales tax, CDTFA, had made some adjustments, and this occurred across multiple municipalities where they had embarked upon a new software system about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and as a result, did not disperse all of their sales tax. And we ended up getting about $2 million worth of additional sales tax in 1819. So that $64.9 million includes that $2 million. In a 1920 adopted budget of $59.9 million, as you can tell, when COVID started to hit, we were starting to look in April. Now, April, you can tell from February, March, and April, how the numbers start going down. Now, some of this is normal. In the February disbursements, that's really when we get our cleanup for the end of the calendar year, our Christmas shopping, so to speak, profits in the stores really start hitting us in February. So we always see about February, the nice jump, the $8 million. So that's normal for the city of Costa Mesa. In March, you see March, the 4.4, that's normal as well. That's about, that's when January hits. People are kind of coming back from their Christmas shopping. They do less shopping in January. So March did not raise any alarm. But however, April is when we first started to see the sales tax start taking a hit to that 3.9. That one is a little bit lower than what we normally anticipate in the month of April. And this is really why we started to focus in on this when we started going to the city council in April and May and in June, because this is a sales tax component where we had that projection that we would continue to take a fiscal impact. Now, our TOT, our transit occupancy tax, that's month to month. So in February, we received January's TOT, what occurred in January. So you can tell here from the actual to adopted, the TOT was already just naturally starting to wind down a little bit from 8.6. We saw a couple of years even before, like starting to take a little bit of reduction. The adopted budget still was a little bit high at 9.6, but you can tell even in year to April of $6 million, when we started seeing the impact of TOT in April. So February, March, 700,000 in April, half of that. So that is not normal for the city of Costa Mesa. So April, 380,000, we started to see those revenues started to take a real big impact. Then we had the stay-at-home orders that happened in mid-March. In May and June, we anticipate additional impacts to the TOT revenue. People were not traveling as much. Conventions were closed. You know, there was a lot of businesses and conventions that our hotel industry relies upon for its TOT revenue. So in April, we started to see that. So you can see that by the end of April, of the $9.6 million that was in the adopted budget, we had only received 6. And we knew already by that point that May and June would also continue to be low unless there was a resolution to COVID, which we know now there still is not a resolution to COVID. And then we have our other property, other taxes, and this is the marijuana tax, the business license tax, all of that in this category. So you can see we received in 18-19 about 6 million. We were anticipating about 6.2, 6.3 in the 19-20 fiscal year. By April, we had received just a little bit over half of that, about 4.8, with only just a few more months left of the fiscal year. And then you have your other revenue categories in there, which are the citations, the parks, recreational, and so forth. And as you can tell, by April, we were doing pretty good. We had received about 18.1 million of the 21.7 that we had adopted. However, as you can tell, even in the month of April, you can start seeing how we're starting to see the revenues declining and continue to decline into May and June. Once those numbers become finalized with our auditors, we'll be bringing those forth to you. So as you can tell from the 19-20 adopted budget of 141.7, by the end of April, we had only received $108.2 million. Are there any questions on the revenues before I kind of go on into the expense side?
Yeah, Carol, you may have mentioned in the other taxes line in April, that's a $1.7 million. That's about 25% of our budget for that. What did you mention? What's that bump in there?
Hold on, let me take a quick look at what happened in that other taxes category. We get in April, we get a one-time and annual payment for our electrical utility franchise tax of about $1.2 million. So that's what accounts for most of that.
Yeah.
That would not have been affected by COVID.
All right, thank you.
I have a question, if I can.
Yes.
Just for clarification, I'm still a little confused on the time lag between when sales tax happens and when the city derives benefit from it. So like today is September the 9th. If somebody goes out today and makes a purchase or a restaurant or whatever, and there's sales tax, okay? Whoever collected the sales tax periodically has to report it to the Board of Equalization. Okay, that's not done the same day, it's done periodically. And then at some point, there has to be a flow back to the cities. So what happened today with today's sales tax? When would we expect to see the benefit cash flow wise into the city? Would it be October? Would it be November? How does it work? Just to clarify.
Sales tax is about a 2-month lag. So for example, for ease, let's use the slide. The February $8 million payment in sales tax that we received from the state. This comes directly from the state. That is to clean up the last quarter of last calendar year, which would include all of the December payments. So all of the December shopping that occurred as throughout the whole month, that is cleaned up by the end of December, and we receive that disbursements in February.
Do we
So-
receive one check a month or 4 checks a year? How often do we receive monies from how cash flow wise? How often do we receive it? Weekly, monthly, quarterly?
We receive it from the state every month, which is why.
So every month we get a check or something, right?
Correct.
Okay. And that check is several months behind the actual timing of the original transaction.
Correct. It's about 2 months behind.
Okay.
And sometimes because it comes from the state, there's a lot of cleaning up that happens. And sometimes we don't get it till maybe the 3rd month. So, which is why we contract out with HDL. They're very good about making sure that any non-payments that we catch, that they catch for us and so forth. But for the most part, it's about a 2-month lag.
So like April was pretty much a shutdown month for the most part. So we really took a beating in April. So that would reflect what we received in May, June, in June or July?
Correct. Correct.
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question also, if you're Wendy.
Ralph?
Wendy?
Yeah, I'm done.
Wen-
I'm finished.
I think Wendy was next.
Okay, thank you, Carol, for bringing in HDL. You sent us the first quarter, January through March. So is this information what you culled from HDL and then added some more? In other words, these are the accurate figures that HDL reports back to us.
Correct. So these are the figures, these are the actual dollars that the city received from the state. So what we do with HDL is we meet with them quarterly because the state does quarterly cleanups. So we meet with the HDL quarterly, and honestly, with COVID, I'm meeting with them almost every week just to make sure I'm on top of what's happening, to make sure that these dollars are correct.
Okay.
So we go through vendors who may have missed a payment last quarter, and now they have to double up. So now we're able to see apples to apples, or at least be known what happened apples to apples. Now there is another caveat with the sales tax that occurred in the month of May. I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. I think I added it in the memo. In the month of May, the city received pretty much a doubling of a sales tax remittance. So when we received that dollar amount, we immediately reached out to HDL because it just was not making sense. We were in the middle of COVID. We received a large dollar amount. I'm glad that we received more than, not receiving it. However, it did bring up the question of what happened with that May payment, because what would be occurring in future payments. So HDL did confirm that there were many cities that received a doubling up of the revenue in the month of May. So they warned me that that would probably mean that June and July, we would receive a lesser amount because of that double payment in May. Now, for cash flow purposes, that was important to know because me and Jennifer needed to make sure that we were still able to keep paying the bills, payroll, and so forth with less cash in the bank because there was going to be less of a receipt. So after multiple discussions, I've reached out to CDTFA multiple times, and HDL and I sat multiple times over the last few weeks to be able to decipher what would be happening with those future payments. So thankfully last week, HDL confirmed that yes, the June payments were going to be coming in significantly less, and July as well. However, the September payment is what I was more worried about at this point, because now we're into another quarter and into a new fiscal year. And I was concerned that there would be a potential clawback of sales tax dollars during the summer months, especially with COVID being down. We don't have many parks programs that were collecting revenue. Sales tax would be our biggest money generator. So that was a cause for concern. I spent a considerable amount of time making sure with Jennifer for cash flow purposes, we were fine. So we're still tying out the actual impact of that double payment, but I'm comfortable now that September will be our normal, unfortunately still COVID, but more of a normalized sales tax disbursement for the city.
Thank you.
Even though August was a wipeout?
Correct.
Because I thought August would come in October, no?
No, I'm just talking about the actual disbursements, and I'm not talking about the expenses done.
I'm talking about the
either
revenue
online.
side, the money coming in
Right.
cash flow.
Correct. For cash flow purposes, I was more focused on what was happening for these summer months.
Okay.
Carol,
Yes.
I wanted to thank you for putting this together. This is extremely informative and probably takes a lot of time. The way I'm looking at it, and I guess I have two questions. One, the first question is, it looks like based on this that we're going to have about an $18 million shortfall in revenue. And based on that, didn't we assume about a $12 million shortfall in revenue in our year-end planning that we did?
So we came to the city council with two scenarios, between 10 million and 18.5 million. This would fall in line. However, keep in mind, we're still closing the year and we're still receiving revenues that are pertained to the 1920 fiscal year. So we're still analyzing that data. I'm hoping to come to you next month with some preliminary unaudited 1920 year-end numbers so we can take a closer look at exactly just what you're saying. We did take and we are taking an impact on our sales tax and our TOT tax. Now, the amount of that impact we'll know more in the next coming weeks as Jennifer continues to post into 1920. However, it's also important to note that right away, we also took measures to contain costs. So immediately in April, when we started seeing the impacts of COVID, we went to the departments, we implemented essential forms that they were now required to submit whenever they wanted to spend any money. So we did not just limit that to COVID expenses, we limited that to all expenses. Anything that they wanted to spend, anything had to have with an essential form, justifying that expense. We also took the additional measure of starting to reduce their operating budgets accordingly, as well as reducing the 2021 budget. So we did a hand in hand with them starting in April. And that, I have to say, the departments really came to the table with. They really did reduce their expenditures. We're still posting back. I'm not comfortable sharing the year end just yet, but from what I'm seeing so far, the departments did do a wonderful job in helping the city with the expense side, making sure that we would be fiscally sustainable through 1920. So it was definitely a multifaceted approach for both fiscal years as we started to go through the initial impacts of COVID.
So the 18 million, that's what we planned on then? We had the low and the high. Did we end up planning on the high? Was that what we ended up doing? I forget.
Well, no, we knew that we were going to have impacts based on how we were seeing the revenues coming in and our constant communications with our consultants. So we knew there would be an impact. We didn't know how big it was because we didn't know how long COVID was going to last. We didn't know how long the shutdown was going to last. How were our online sales going to be impacting our sales tax? And on the other side, in talking with Travel Costa Mesa, I knew that they were trying to also be strategic and come up with different ideas to try to lure Californians to Costa Mesa, more staycations close. So there was also the hope that maybe they could come up with some more ideas and implementation. They are working with the state to help on their side to recover some of the losses. So we were constantly in communication with our partners to make sure that we're staying on top of the revenue side. Now for this revenue, this 18 million that you're seeing on year to April, those were dollars that we had already in the city's financial system by the end of April. So the $18 million in other revenues, we had already received that. So I was very happy being able to see that we had received already some of those monies. We received a nice chunk of it by the time COVID hit. My concern was how were the rest of the months, the last quarter, really going to be impacting the rest of the fiscal year, at the same time managing the expense side.
Carol, maybe I didn't ask the question right. The 18 million shortfall in revenue, which it looks like we're going to have, we offsetted that with 10 million out of the general fund, I believe, and then additional cuts in expenses. Was that did we fund that to 18 million, or was it something less than that?
I will be reporting more on the 1920 in the next couple of weeks. I'm still working with Jennifer on making sure that we're posting all of the revenues and all of the expenditures accordingly to that last quarter of the fiscal year to be able to give you a better idea of where the finances were. I'm very comfortable that it's definitely not the $18 million number. Like I said, I'm very happy and proud of the city departments. They made a big sacrifice in making sure that they pulled back some of their expenditures. We really went into full COVID mode in making sure that the city maintained safe and fluid. At the same time, they did come back on the expense side. So this really was a team effort with the city council to make sure that 1920 would be minimally impacted for COVID. And I'm proud that on the expense side, just looking at the numbers the way they are today, that's exactly what's happened. Not quite comfortable sharing too much because Jennifer is still posting. We are expecting the auditors to come into, well, virtually, hopefully, into our city's finances starting in October in the next couple of weeks. And from my experience with the auditors, they will dig through every single piece of paper they can to make sure that we have properly posted where the numbers correctly should be. Have no full confidence in Jennifer and her abilities and her staff to know that she's caught everything. We've been here some endless nights, and sometimes I kind of wonder if she's gonna tell me to stop coming. Did you post this? Did you post that? Did you remember that? And that's really kind of what happens is we make sure that everything gets posted to the right fiscal year so we get the full accurate impact of COVID in the 1920, as well as what ended up happening in 1920. So for right now, I'm very happy to report that what I've seen so far, the departments have done a wonderful job. And from what you can see on the revenue side, we definitely started to see in April the expenses, the revenues starting to take a hit, which is why we immediately turned around and with the city council started to make changes right away in the way we operate our finances to protect the city's finances.
Carol, I just want to thank you again for a super job. And I know it's been tough on everybody, and especially the employees cutting back. So
thank you.
Carol, we all realize you're not in the speculation business, but just as a wild guess, what's our bottom line going to be for 2020?
What do you mean my bottom line?
Well, what's our deficit going to be? What's your best guess?
Oh, I can't do that. Not yet.
Okay.
Well, I think
It's not going to be 30 million, I can tell you that.
29 million?
Yeah, Katrina, the papers
Not anywhere near that number.
kind of went wild with that one, didn't they?
Well, I don't know if it was the papers that went wild. It might have been others, but.
Well, I think what Carol, and appreciate Carol, Jennifer, and Anna, all the staff, Angie, all your efforts. Certainly, starting in the March timeframe to cutting back, realizing revenues were going to be impacted and cutting back on the expenditures as a result of that. It's from what you're saying, Carol, it sounds like the city staff really stepped up, various departments, to cut back on the expenditures and continuing to do that in 2021. I think without speculating, I guess it sounds like the worst, at the time, the worst case scenario was an $18.5 million issue for last year. It sounds like the problem is less than that. So that's all good news. Which kind of a question I was going to ask is a little bit different, but I think you answered it in your comments. Initially, the city went to council and said we need to account for a $10 million shortfall. That 10 million could grow to 18.5. One way to get that to that additional $8.5 million was using some more reserves, reducing some expenses, and reducing capital another $1 million. Are you saying that capital, that potential $1 million reduction of additional capital is not necessary?
At this point, we did not implement that additional $1 million. We only implemented the original capital reduction of $6 million.
$6 million. Okay. All right. Thank you. And good. Thank you for all your efforts here. Sounds like it's not as bad as thought for 1920.
Thank you. Well, we still need the auditors to come into the building.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other?
You don't think an $18 million shortfall is not good? It's not bad. Okay. I think it's at the high end of what we thought it would be. That's not, and it's going to be longer than what we thought it was going to be too.
Hopefully.
Well, we'll get.
We don't know what the future is, but you have to make an educated guess when you do budgeting. And it appears we went beyond the parameters of that educated guess because of the extension of COVID and the shutdown. That's the impression I have. Am I wrong?
We will know more soon. We will know more soon. I know everybody's anxious just as I am. Like I mentioned, I'm pretty bugged at Jennifer almost every night. When are we posting all the numbers so I can start reporting out? And I think from my perspective, I'm more comfortable waiting a couple more weeks, getting some of the auditors initial legwork through, giving the accounting staff and Jennifer the opportunity to go through those revenues and expenses a little bit better as we move through these next few weeks. And then we'll come back. I have a full intent to come back to FiPAC next month with preliminary unaudited year-end numbers at that point.
Okay, Carol, do you want to give us a quick review of the expenditures?
Yes.
Can I just ask one more question about HDL? So HDL will still have to bring in the information for May and June. They haven't given that to you yet, right?
It was in the second quarter, but that May and June we actually did talk about that last week. And that's when, yes, the June payment was significantly reduced because we did receive essentially a doubling up in the May payment. Then my focus turned to the August and September payments, because if they continue to take already a reduced disbursement, I wanted to be prepared for it for cash flow purposes.
So do you do your analytics and then HDL comes in and just confirms those, or are you working with them?
We actually, we work separately and then we come together and we have discussions.
Okay.
And then we discuss where those discrepancies are, if there are any.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. And here you'll see the January through April general fund expenditures. Kind of broke it into two categories for now, the salaries and benefits, and then the operating. As you can tell, last year in 18-19, we had about expenditures of about 147.5 million. We adopted 142.2. And by the end of April, we had already spent about 112.9 million. So this was the other challenge that we were facing in April, was we already had $112.9 million of the general fund already spent. And we really needed to get into that expenditure reduction mode for the last fiscal year. For the expenses, they occur real time. So it's not like revenues where they're a month or two behind. For the salaries and benefits, they post as soon as. For the operating side, however, they'll start to post when the payment goes out. So if we receive an invoice a month or two down the road, we still have to accrue it back. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So as you can tell, for the expense side, we're about 112.9 million by the end of April. And we are still accruing back some of those invoices that relate directly to 1920. Anybody have any questions on this one? This one I kind of put together really quick so that you could have a gauge of where the expense side in the general fund was occurring at the same time that the revenues were taking place by the end of April.
Ralph, I have a question.
Yeah.
So as far as COVID expenses, that reimbursements, then explain how that timeline's going and what the expectation is.
So for COVID, we created a separate fund. We created, the city already has an emergency fund that we started to post expenditures. So that's not part of these numbers at all. Because they are not.
Is that on?
Your
is it
audio-
just me, or is it Carol is all?
Carol, your audio is a lot of reverberation.
Garble.
Is that better sometimes if I do that?
No, we can't hear you.
Just stop sharing to see if maybe
There-
that.
Just a lot of feedback.
I think the federal government is shutting us down.
Try it. Why don't you try it again, Carol?
About now.
No. Same.
Probably have to log out and come back in.
All right, how about now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Could you repeat what you said, though, the answer to my question? Because we didn't get any of that.
Hear me now? I can't hear you, Wendy, but
She asked you to repeat the answer.
I don't think I can hear anybody. Let me see. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, so to answer your question, the emergency COVID related expenses were not coded to the general fund. We created a special emergency fund for those expenditures. And we also posted revenues from the CARES Act that we received to that fund. So that way it would be fully contained and really easy to track, as well as easy to track for FEMA purposes as well. So we didn't want the expenses commingled with the general fund. We created its own account. So no, they're not included in the PowerPoint. This is solely the general fund. And also keep in mind that by this time, by April, we were just starting to expend on COVID. So our greatest expenditures came after, probably towards the end of April, the beginning of May, which is the sanitation of the buildings, of the safety fleet. Most of the PPEs we had been receiving were through mutual aid. So that was promising for us fiscally. So like I said, most of the additional expenses came in probably after April because they're larger, more expensive expenditures, as well as the staffing.
So when you reconcile the
And then I
expenses,
can't hear you. I think something's wrong with my computer.
you can't hear me? Ralph, can you
Okay,
hear
there
me?
you go.
Oh, okay. So when you reconcile the expenses that the city output with what's anticipated with revenue, is that going to make up some of the shortfall that we experienced beginning in March?
We'd have to see how the revenues and the expenses kind of fall out by the end to see how that reconciliation is going to occur. We're dealing a lot with the auditors and with some of the special requirements by FEMA and the federal guidelines right now. They're not the easiest to work with, but Jennifer has been great. So has Anna. Anna Baca, who's the accounting budget manager, has taken the lead on the COVID part of it and has helped make sure that we're properly tracking both the revenue side and the expense side and where they're coming from.
Okay, thank you.
Carol, kind of an in the weeds question. Do you just accrue at year end expenses? You don't accrue monthly, do you?
That's a question for Jennifer.
Jennifer?
And answer that, yes, we accrue at year end.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, let me go back at Carol. Let me ask my question in a different way. Through April, we're tracking about a $4.6 million deficit, right?
Correct.
So with 2 months to go in fiscal year 2020, do you anticipate that deficit is going to widen substantially in those 2 months?
So I want to caution you when you say the April $4 million deficit, because revenues do not come in the same way the expenditures flow out. So we have a lot of revenues that, for example, right, sales tax, that's 2 months out. So we're still accruing that sales tax that's back into 1920, right? Property taxes, we receive little parts of property taxes throughout the year, but we really get 2 large disbursements, which is in November, December, and then April, May, right? Because when you pay your property taxes, it's due at the end of November, and then it's due in April. And those are the timeframes that we're going to be receiving that property tax share. So I caution you when you look at these numbers and you're looking at the revenue versus the expense, because they don't necessarily walk and talk the same, which is why I wouldn't take the revenues at the time at the end of April and then just subtract the expenditures to come up the deficit, because we're still accruing a lot of those revenues back into 1920 that help offset those expenses.
Okay.
Okay. Bob, you okay?
Yeah, I'm just,
Okay.
I'm still with 2 months to go, we're 4.6 million apart. So I understand what you're saying, Carol, that revenues come in spasmodically, but we've cut our expenses to the bone. I'm sure we didn't all of a sudden balloon our expenses in May and June. Am I correct?
Well, keep in mind that May and June, we were full COVID. So a lot of our staff time, especially our park staff time, our police and fire, they were right now diverted into the COVID. So we were not functioning day to day as normal. as we normally would. We were full COVID alert and making sure that we were properly taking care of the city, but at the same time with the knowledge that we're all into COVID protection now. So it's different. Even our expenses, they're different. So even though we can continue to track, for example, payroll seems to be pretty fluid. Every 2 weeks, it's not going to have too much of an impact. However, there are some components of payroll that are one time. For example, CalPERS, we prepay our UA out and we pay that unfunded liability in July. So that's one big disbursement that happens at the end of July. That's not going to happen again for the rest of the fiscal year. So there's a lot of components on both the revenue and expense side that you need to, I would caution you when you start taking account the revenues to the expense, which is why I'd rather kind of hold off until Jennifer's at a better place in accruing back some of those and come back to you in October to give you some preliminary unaudited numbers that we can really talk through. This is just to start giving you an idea where we were before COVID hit, so you can start seeing some of the actuals that we were experiencing and we were noticing at that time, and why we pivoted fairly quickly into fiscal restraint mode. So that way we can contain the costs and have a much more in-depth analysis on our revenue side.
Carol,
Okay,
may I
Carol,
interrupt?
thank you.
Bob?
I think what you're going to have, everybody, I think we'll just have to wait 30 days here and let Jennifer and Carol and Anna and everybody do their thing and true up the numbers and make their accruals and work with the auditors and see where we stand for 19,
But
20.
Ralph, I think the point here is that you're focusing on audited numbers for the year 19, 20. We're in a new year, okay? You're worried about the audited numbers for the year that ended June 30th. I think the greater concern is for the new year. We just took a big hit in the first 2 months, July and August. And on a
Yes.
cash flow basis, that's where the questions are coming up. I think that's where Bob Juniman is trying to raise that point. The audited numbers are terrific, but they don't affect what's happening today and the weeks to come. The fact that we got hit with a really horrendous, pandemic situation here in July and August, which is the new year.
Well, okay, but Bob, I think we've seen charts for 1920, not for 2021. And all the questions have been related to last year, basically, 1920. And Carol and Jennifer are saying, well, okay, we won't know the exact, we won't have a much better idea in 30 days from now in October. And let's not try and speculate on what, last year will be.
But you don't need auditors to tell you how much cash you have in the bank.
Well, okay, we're talking last year, though. All the questions, all the charts have been for last year.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. And let's wait for 30 days. Now, yes, this year, the current year is certainly a great concern because I think COVID's lasted a lot longer than anybody's imagined, but Orange County's starting to open up. We'll see what happens, that's obviously the current year is going to be wide open as to, who knows what it's going to be like 60 days from now. But I don't know, Carol, I mean, you guys are saying, listen, give us another 30 days. We'll have a much better idea of where 1920 stands.
Correct. We're still wanting to go through some of the accruals to get into 1920. Trust that Jennifer and we meet weekly on the cash flow, which is why the sales tax component was very worrisome to me when May came in with that double payment. It was not so much that we received so much money in May, which was great. It was what was going to happen to our cash flow payments in the summer months when the other cash flow, all the receipts are much lower. So Jennifer and I meet every week and we go through cash flow, knowing and updating based on the knowledge we get from either HTL or how we're seeing the revenues and numbers coming in, how that's being impacted as well. That is a little bit of a different conversation, but for 1920, we definitely need 30 more days. And just to caution you that when we do come back in 30 days, there's still going to be preliminary unaudited numbers that will continue to move until the auditors give us their final finding, hopefully that we're all clear and Jennifer can produce the final CAFR, which normally happens in December.
Right, okay, okay.
So the other thing, so Carol, tell me if I'm saying anything wrong here, okay? The other thing to remember, Al, about the 2021 fiscal year, and in specifically July and August that we've just been through. So, of course, it starts in July 1st. August, I believe it was August 13th. Sorry, July 13th. July 13th is when we had kind of the rollback of some of the openings that had started back in May. But the May and July 13th is a lot of businesses, because of programs we put into place, started transitioning into using their outdoor space. Like if you look at a place like El Matador, which we're all familiar with driving by El Matador, in March and April, which are the numbers that we just saw, they were basically completely shut down and just doing takeout. And I'm just using them as an example. By the time we got around to July, which is when they had the rollback in the in some of the openings because of the COVID numbers that we were getting those first couple weeks of July, El Matador had moved outside. And now they're doing, it seems like they're doing more business than they ever did. And they're not alone. I'm just using them as an example. But
there's very few
retail business. Oh, let me
Matadors.
finish what I'm saying. Let me finish. Trust me. We'll check to make sure I got anything wrong. Carol will correct me. She'll fact check me, and then you can respond. The other thing that's happening is there's certain things like the golf course, for example. According to Danny Lane, the golf course paid in July $50,000 in their rent. Now, just to give you just a basis of comparison, for as long as I've ever seen budgets, and I've been looking at budgets for about 10 years in the city, the golf course has generated $2.2 million a year, approximately. This year we budgeted 1.575, and it's had ever since we opened in April, they've had record months every month. If that continues, and we don't know, that'll annualize at about almost $2 million over what we're budgeting. So happening in the economy, my point that I'm making, and Carol will fact check me and everything like that, is there's things that are happening in the economy, even in July and even in August when we had our rollbacks, some of the shutdowns, that are more promising than what we saw in March and April, which was just a full-on shutdown and kind of mass hysteria and in the budget. So I guess there are certain like little pockets of optimism. And now, of course, now we're in September, and starting yesterday, things have loosened up even more, and our COVID numbers are doing much better. So I guess there are these kind of factors that give me some hope that our projections could be conservative. Okay, did I get anything wrong? You fact check me, Carol. You keep.
I did.
Make me accountable.
I checked you. Yes, you're actually right. The golf course, after they opened up, really took off. I'm very happy with the revenues that they've brought in to the city. Definitely the adjustments that the businesses have made. I have seen some positive in the revenue stream coming through. There's some revenues that came in a little bit higher than even what we anticipated, such as like our ambulance program. That's definitely higher than the adopted budget. So there's definitely some of that going on. So definitely, which is why I caution about, making too much of speculation about how big the deficit is in 1920. We do have some of those adjustments that were made that we're starting to see fruition in our general fund revenue stream. Unfortunately, it's not going to cover the full impact, but Mayor Pro Tem Stevens is correct that we do have some revenues that have come in higher than we had originally anticipated. And that is a big relief to me. At least.
May I ask a quick question? El Matador is not in South Coast Plaza. It has a huge frontage. How did South Coast Plaza do from the middle of July through the entire month of August? Do we have an idea?
We won't get those numbers just yet. They're about 2 months out. So probably September, October, we'll be able to get some numbers from HDL on how South Coast Plaza did this summer.
Does anybody have a feel? I haven't been there in all those months. Does anybody have a feel? Were they closed down completely?
Ralph, can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, so what we did for South Coast Plaza is that before they were even open, we helped them to get out into the parking garage and create a pavilion. That pavilion generated literally millions of dollars just by opening up that pavilion. And prior to the pavilion opening, they actually were reporting to me anecdotally, it's not been audited or anything, but that some of their boutiques, their luxury brand boutiques, were doing better at that point in time. So that would have been sometime in I think that was June, maybe at maybe April, May and June time period. They were doing better than they had done the previous year at that same time period. And so partly it's a strange phenomena, but it's partly because very, very, very high end earners, very, very wealthy people weren't able to travel. And so they were shopping. And they were shopping quite a bit. Stores were doing upwards of $250,000 to $500,000 a day in some of their luxury brand boutiques. They sold a $1.5 million ring in one of those little boutiques in the pavilion. So we can benefit from that. and I, the Plaza executives are sharing that, yes, everything got shut down, but they are really pleasantly surprised at how quickly it's coming back and how high the revenue is. So, we'll see it when we see it, but I'm
good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see my hand raised. I tried that thing down here. Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Katrina. I think with all the effort, in my opinion, being on this committee, with all the effort that Jennifer and Carol and the city manager have done, we need to look at the glass as being half full and not half empty. And that there are surprises that Carol can articulate and analyze, rather than the worst case scenario that the city manager explained to the staff and all the cuts, that we need to be optimistic and not project some kind of a $30 million deficit, because that it's not true. It's not accurate to say that and mislead people into thinking and kind of a fear tactic that the sky is falling. The sky is not falling in Costa Mesa. And I thank Katrina and John and the staff for staying on top of this, so that we can look forward. And yeah, it's not easy, but I think you've done a great job.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we? Yeah, it's just, I know everybody on the call is certainly concerned about the current year. There's the big question mark of COVID and what that impact will be. It sounds like things don't look as bleak as maybe initially thought several months ago, but we're 2 months into the year. It's much, much too early, especially with COVID, to start speculating on the current year. I mean, stay concerned, stay on top of it, yes, but let's not start making assumptions based on 2 months of actuals when you still need to true up last year. Okay, Carol or Jennifer, anything else on that?
I think we all covered it. Thank you very much. And I wanted to thank all of FiPAC. You've been instrumental in helping me through this. And Jennifer as well. It's been challenging, but also very, very rewarding to see some of these numbers, see how the teams get together and make what's best for the city of Costa Mesa.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, I got 5:30. We don't have committee member comments and I'll take the hit for that on the agenda. That's my fault, I guess. So I guess, and let's make sure we put committee member comments on next month's agenda. And then, so just talking out loud about next month, let's say we got member comments. We talked about approving the minutes for prior meetings.
Could we make suggestions for the agenda, for the next month's agenda?
Yes, I was just going to ask are the committee do members have suggestions for October meeting?
I have one.
Sure, go ahead, Al.
Would be to address the status of the negotiations with the associations. Now, traditionally, I've been in the minority. I feel that this committee shouldn't be involved in those negotiations because they need to be held confidential. But the question I have in the back of my mind, the one issue is, we traditionally we do a 4-year contract. Okay, traditionally. Probably because it's such a difficult process to go through, and none of the parties want to do it every year or even every 2 years. But my point is, because of COVID, I think a 4-year commitment, contractual, given the state of the economy and COVID and all of that, might not be appropriate. And I would like to ask that we discuss that and put that on the agenda for the next month, if you guys feel it's appropriate. That's all.
Well, the contracts have already been approved and signed and voted on by the city council. So you
all of them have?
All 4 contracts. And we normally do, I think 4 years is actually a longer time than we normally do. But all the contracts include next year, correct me if I'm wrong, Carol, but next year as a kind of a status quo year. And so then if we were able to get funding reimbursed to the city, then we would pass that through. And then what we negotiated for the furloughs doesn't come into play till years 3 and 4.
So what got approved was not a traditional 4-year commitment. There was some provisos attached to it.
Right. And then there's also some language in there in all the contracts that allows us to reopen if, for example, the sky falls down.
The sky falls down. Right. I'm relieved to hear that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other suggestions for next month? Okay, hearing none, I guess is the term. Okay, let's see. And then you are thinking ahead to November for a minute. You're thinking November, Carol and Jennifer, of statusing council on the first quarter of the current year?
I'm actually planning on going to council in October.
Okay.
To do a first quarter cleanup and some preliminary unaudited numbers at that point.
Okay, so an unaudited FY 1920.
In 2021 cleanups. We did 2021 so quick. I want to provide an opportunity to departments that may have any minor cleanups that they may have.
Oh, okay. Would that be, okay, so that would be like an adjusted budget item then, if you will, because there had preliminary, or not preliminary, but let's say a budget was approved for 2021, you're just saying there could be some adjustments to that 2021 number.
Correct.
Okay. 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 Any other parting comments? I see a bunch of blank faces there. Okay. With that, we'll adjourn our September 9th meeting. And I thank everybody for participating and hope to see everybody on Zoom again. I guess it's going to be Zoom in October. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.